The arrogant Bajoran commander's sneering laughter cut through the bridge of the tiny human patrol ship as he gloated at the pathetic vessel, not realizing his overconfident mockery would soon turn to utter horror when the humans revealed the 800,000 warship armada they had built right under the galaxy's unsuspecting nose. It started as just another boring patrol mission near the neutral zone for Captain Jake Parker and his small Federation starship. The galaxy had been locked in a tense Cold War for years between the human-led United Earth Alliance and the alien Bajoran Star Confederacy. Both sides postured and made threats, but open war had not yet broken out. The Bajoran government constantly belittled human technology as primitive and backwards compared to their own. They treated humans as an inferior species. Suddenly, alarms blared as a massive Bajoran warship decloaked directly in front of Jake's ship. The Bajoran commander, a snide-looking alien named Mizar, appeared on screen. "Human vessel, you have violated Bajoran space," Mizar declared arrogantly. "Your pathetic ship is now forfeit." "Commander, I assure you we have not crossed the neutral zone," Jake replied calmly, although his heart raced. "Please check your sensors again." Mizar laughed dismissively. "Typical human lies. Everyone knows your species is technologically inept. Your sensors are obviously malfunctioning. I should destroy your puny ship right now as an example to your kind." Jake gritted his teeth but held his tongue. A battle here could spark an interstellar war Earth wasn't ready for. He had to de-escalate. "There's no need for threats," Jake said. "I'm happy to move my ship further back from the border while we discuss—" "Enough!" Mizar roared, nostrils flaring. "I'm done wasting time on a lowly human. Prepare to be boarded and captured. If you resist, we will vaporize you into atoms." The Bajoran ship locked its weapons on Jake's vessel. Jake braced himself. This was it. The war was about to begin, and his crew would be the first casualties. The Bajorans would crush Earth, enslave humanity. He had failed his species, failed his family. Suddenly alarms sounded on the Bajoran bridge. Mizar looked off-screen and his eyes went wide with shock. A colossal human fleet had just dropped out of hyperspace, over 100,000 ships strong. Massive human warships, dreadnoughts and carriers, dwarfed Mizar's vessel as they surrounded it on all sides. More ships arrived by the second, until the Bajoran craft floated helplessly in a sea of human military might. "This is Admiral Vance of the United Earth Alliance Armada," a grizzled, stern human voice broadcast to both ships. "Commander Mizar, you have made a grave error. The Federation only pretended to have a technologically backwards fleet. The puny humans you mock have built a military force 800,000 ships strong, with the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. If you want a war, we will wipe the Bajoran Confederacy from the stars with ease. The choice is yours." Mizar gaped at the human fleet in stunned terror. Admiral Vance's face appeared on Jake's screen, and he gave a small nod before closing the channel. The stage was set for Earth to become the undisputed rulers of the galaxy. That is, if the arrogant Bajorans were foolish enough to provoke humanity to use its true strength. The standoff hung in the void of space, neither side willing to stand down. Admiral Vance's face hardened as he stared down Mizar on the screen. "Commander Mizar, you are surrounded and outgunned. Surrender your vessel immediately and prepare to be taken into custody." Vance's voice boomed through the comm system, each word sharp as a blade. Mizar's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a defiant sneer. "I will not surrender to human trickery. The Bajoran government must be informed of your deception at once. I demand you allow me to return to Bajoran space to report this immediately." Vance banged his head on the armrest of his command chair, the sound echoing through the bridge. "Denied. Your ship is now property of the United Earth Alliance. Your crew will be interrogated to determine what you know of Bajoran military secrets and plans. Captain Parker, assemble a boarding party and prepare to seize control of the Bajoran ship." Jake nodded, his heart made with willpower. He quickly gathered a team of his most skilled security officers and made his way to the shuttle bay. As they prepared to dock with Mizar's ship, a transmission came through. "This is Commander Mizar. I am transmitting my formal surrender. We will comply with your orders." The Bajoran's voice was strained, defeated. Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. Perhaps this could end without further bloodshed. He and his team boarded the docking tunnel, weapons at the ready as the airlock cycled open. The moment they stepped onto Mizar's ship, a blinding flash engulfed them. The world turned to fire and shrapnel, the force of the explosion hurling Jake backwards. Alarms screamed, and emergency bulkheads slammed shut as the Bajoran ship tore itself apart from the inside out. Jake's team had no chance, vaporized instantly in the antimatter detonation. Back on the bridge of his own ship, Jake staggered to his feet, his head ringing, the taste of blood in his mouth. On the display, he saw the tattered remnants of Mizar's ship drifting in space, no life signs aboard. Ops reported faint warp signatures, cloaked shuttles that had departed just before the blast. Mizar had tricked them all, sacrificing his own ship just to kill a few dozen humans. Jake's heart pounded in his ears. His fists clenched so tight his nails drew blood from his palms. "Admiral, permission to lead a Spec Ops squad into Bajoran space. I'll hunt Mizar down myself and make him pay for what he's done." Vance nodded grimly. "Permission granted, Captain, but move fast. I'm dispatching 200 ships to the Bajoran border. If Mizar reaches their high command before you silence him, the Bajorans may launch an all-out first strike against Earth. We're on the edge of a galactic war now." As Jake stalked to the shuttle bay once more, this time at the head of an elite team of commandos, he couldn't shake the image of his fallen crewmen from his mind. Their deaths would not be in vain. One way or another, Mizar would face human justice. Jake's stealth frigate slipped away from the fleet, vanishing into the void as it set course for Bajoran space. In the distance, the human armada moved into formation, the Bajoran fleet doing the same on the other side of the border. The two mighty powers stared each other down across the stars, fingers poised over triggers, each waiting to see who would blink first. The whole galaxy held its breath in that moment, knowing that the next few hours would decide the future of every sentient being. The human Spec Ops team racing towards a confrontation that could push the galaxy to the brink, or pull it back from the edge of oblivion. Jake's stealth frigate cut through the inky void of Bajoran space, its cloaking device masking their approach. The Spec Ops team huddled around tactical displays, reviewing sensor data on Mizar's escape shuttles. "There," Lieutenant Rodriguez pointed to a blinking icon. "Shuttles docked at that outpost." Jake nodded, his face a mask of focus. "All right, people, gear up. We go in fast and quiet." The team donned sleek exosuits, checking weapons and equipment. Jake felt the familiar weight of his plasma rifle as he hefted it. Their ship glided into a concealed position near the outpost. One by one, the Spec Ops soldiers activated their suits' stealth fields and jetpacked across the vacuum. Jake touched down on the outpost's hull, magnetic boots locking on. He signaled and Ensign Chen got to work on the airlock controls. Seconds ticked by. Jake's heart pounded. Finally, Chen gave a thumbs up. The airlock cycled open. They slipped inside, only to find themselves face to face with a squad of Bajoran elites. For a split second, both sides froze in shock. Then all hell broke loose. Jake dove behind a stack of cargo crates as plasma bolts seared the air. His team scattered, returning fire. The confined space echoed with the crack of weapons and shouts of the wounded. "Push forward," Jake yelled, vaulting over his cover. He caught a Bajoran soldier in the chest with a 3-round burst. They fought their way deeper into the facility, Jake's mind racing. This was too much security for a remote outpost. What were the Bajorans hiding? In a lower level, they found their answer. Jake's eyes widened as he scanned a terminal displaying cult propaganda, images of Bajoran supremacy, plans for humanity's annihilation. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Mizar's part of some kind of extermination cult." A hail of fire interrupted his shock. They battled room to room, inching towards the command center. Jake's armor was scorched, his muscles burning. They breached the final door, but the command chair sat empty. Mizar had slipped away mere minutes before. Jake thumped his hand on the console. "Damn it, secure any officers still breathing. We need answers." They rounded up the surviving Bajorans, including a lieutenant commander who glared at Jake with pure hatred. Under intensive questioning, the Bajoran spat out crucial intel: Mizar's destination, the cult's plans, the network of spies on Earth. Jake's blood ran cold. He opened a secure channel to Admiral Vance, relaying the dire news. "Good work, Captain," Vance's voice crackled. "But this isn't over. You need to take out that space station and Mizar with it." Jake studied the station schematics, a plan forming. "Sir, I think I've found a way in. We'll need to—" He outlined the daring scheme to infiltrate through maintenance tunnels. It was risky, but their only shot. "Make it happen, Parker," Vance ordered. "The fate of humanity is in your hands." Jake's stealth frigate cut silently through the void, its cloaking device masking their approach to the massive Bajoran space station. The asteroid loomed ahead, pockmarked with docking bays and sensor arrays. "Patrolcraft at 2 o'clock, Rodriguez whispered, eyes glued to the sensor readouts. Once clear, they pressed on. Jake brought them in close to a maintenance airlock, hidden from the main docking areas. "Suit up," he ordered. The team donned sleek exosuits, checking seals and oxygen levels. Jake led them out the airlock, jetpacking across open space to the station entrance. Chen got to work on the security panel while the others kept watch. "We're in," Chen reported as the airlock cycled open. They slipped inside, finding themselves in a narrow maintenance tunnel. Jake consulted the schematics on his HUD. "This way to the central core." For hours they crawled through cramped passages, pausing whenever footsteps echoed nearby. At one point, Jake held up a fist as voices approached. The team flattened themselves against the walls, hardly daring to breathe as 2 Bajoran technicians passed by, oblivious to the intruders mere centimeters away. Finally, they reached the central processing core. Banks of computers hummed softly. Chen jacked into a terminal and began uploading the virus. Suddenly, alarms blared. A technician burst in, eyes wide with shock. Before Jake could react, the Bajoran slammed his hand on an emergency panel. "Intruders in the core," he shouted into his comm before Jake's stun blast took him down. "Run!" Jake yelled. They sprinted for the exit, but Bajoran security forces were already pouring in. Plasma bolts seared the air. Jake dove behind a console, returning fire. His team scattered, taking cover where they could. He laid down, suppressing fire as his squad retreated. More Bajorans poured in. Jake's armor took multiple hits, his shields flaring. He tossed a grenade, using the explosion as cover to fall back. Fighting his way through the station, Jake finally reached the war room doors. He took a deep breath, then burst in, guns blazing. Bajoran officials fell left and right, but in the chaos Jake spotted Mizar fleeing through a side exit. With a snarl of fury, Jake gave chase. He pursued Mizar deep into the station, finally cornering him in the pulsing heart of the main reactor. Warning klaxons blared as the virus took hold, systems failing all around them. Mizar turned, baring his teeth in a feral grin. "You're too late, human," he spat. "Our fleet is already—" Jake tackled him mid-sentence. They grappled furiously, trading vicious blows. Jake felt ribs crack as Mizar landed a solid hit, but he responded with a devastating uppercut that sent the alien reeling. Just as Jake was about to land the finishing blow, the reactor chamber doors burst open. A squad of Bajoran guards poured in, weapons trained on Jake. Mizar latched onto Jake's arm, sneering, "If I die, you die with me, human." Jake's mind raced. With his free hand, he grabbed a detonator from his belt. "Not today," he growled. He thumbed the switch. Explosive charges he'd planted earlier detonated, shearing through a massive support strut. The reactor core groaned ominously as power surges racked the chamber. Jake wrenched free of Mizar's grip and sprinted for an open maintenance shaft. He dove in headfirst as the reactor went critical behind him. The last thing he saw was Mizar's shocked face as the alien was consumed by blinding light. Jake tumbled through the shaft, alarms screaming all around him. He burst out onto a lower level, finding the battered remnants of his team waiting. They sprinted for their ship as the station began to tear itself apart. Jake threw himself into the pilot's seat, gunning the engines. They blasted free of the doomed facility moments before it vanished in a colossal antimatter explosion. The shockwaves from the exploding Bajoran station had barely subsided when reports flooded in of chaos erupting across Bajoran space. Jake's tactical display lit up with distress calls, conflicting orders and power grabs as Bajoran warlords scrambled to fill the sudden power vacuum. Admiral Vance's voice crackled over the comm. "All ships, this is it. The Bajorans are in disarray. We strike now." Jake watched in awe as the massive human armada surged forward. 800,000 ships, their hulls gleaming in the starlight, advanced as one unstoppable tide. His own ship joined the vanguard, pushing deep into Bajoran territory. They smashed through hastily assembled defensive lines, Bajoran ships scattering before their onslaught. Days blurred together in a haze of constant combat. Jake led bombing runs, space battles, and surgical strikes against key targets. On Dravara 5, he piloted his ship through a maelstrom of anti-aircraft fire, teeth clenched as he targeted the massive warship assembly complex below. A rain of destruction poured from the belly of his ship and those of his squadron. The Bajoran facility erupted in a series of massive explosions, sending towering pillars of flame into the sky. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained but a sea of molten metal and twisted wreckage. Jake barely had time to catch his breath before new orders came through. His XO, Commander Sarah Chen, was leading a daring raid on the planet Ulinus. Jake's ship provided cover fire as Chen's team assaulted the flagship of Bajoran warlord Gorvak. "We've breached the hull," Chen's voice crackled over the comm. "Pushing to the bridge now." Jake held his breath, listening to the sounds of furious combat. After what felt like hours, Chen's triumphant voice rang out. "We've got him. Gorvak is in custody." A cheer went up across the bridge. Another Bajoran warlord neutralized, another step closer to victory. But the Bajorans weren't finished yet. As Jake's ship approached the Varys system, alarms suddenly blared. A massive Bajoran fleet erupted from behind a nearby moon, catching the human forces completely off guard. Jake's stomach lurched as artificial gravity failed. His ship drifted helplessly, surrounded by the inferno of battle. Through the viewport, he watched human and Bajoran vessels alike torn to shreds in the savage melee. "Prep for emergency transport," he ordered, grabbing his rifle. "We're boarding that ship." Moments later, Jake materialized on the bridge of the enemy vessel, his strike team fanning out around him. The Bajoran crew reacted with shock, scrambling for weapons. Jake ducked behind a console as plasma bolts seared the air. He returned fire, downing 2 Bajoran officers. To his left, Ensign Rodriguez grappled with the ship's navigator, while Lieutenant Kim worked furiously to hack into the ship's systems. A burly Bajoran charged Jake, swinging a wicked-looking blade. Jake barely managed to deflect the blow, the edge of the knife slicing a thin line across his cheek. He countered with a vicious elbow strike, feeling the Bajoran's nose crunch under the impact. "Charges set," Kim called out. Jake nodded grimly. "Fall back to the transport point." They fought their way back to their entry position, Jake laying down covering fire as his team beamed out one by one. He slammed his hand on his transport beacon just as the first explosion rocked the Bajoran ship. Jake rematerialized on his own vessel, watching through the viewport as the enemy flagship erupted in a massive fireball. The explosion triggered a chain reaction, consuming the remaining Bajoran ships in a storm of destruction. In the aftermath, as the last Bajoran warship signaled their surrender, Jake allowed himself a moment of relief. It was over. They had won. Weeks later, Jake stood on a stage in the heart of New Washington, Earth's glittering capital. Crowds cheered as Admiral Vance, now self-proclaimed Emperor of the new human galactic empire, pinned the Medal of Valor to Jake's chest. "For your incredible service to humanity," Vance intoned, his voice booming across the square, "I hereby promote you to the rank of Fleet Admiral." The crowd's roar was deafening. Jake forced a smile, but unease churned in his gut. As he looked out over the sea of faces, he saw not just joy and pride, but also a hardness, a hunger for dominance that hadn't been there before. Later that night, Jake stood alone on the balcony of his new quarters, staring up at the stars. The weight of his new rank felt heavy on his shoulders. He thought of the Bajoran prisoners he'd seen earlier, marched through the streets in chains. He remembered Vance's words about cleansing former Bajoran worlds for human colonization. Jake's hands tightened on the railing. He had fought to protect humanity, not to create an oppressive empire. But now, looking at what Earth was becoming, he realized the real battle was just beginning. Jake Parker stood in his private quarters, aboard the Imperial flagship, staring out at the vastness of space. His fingers traced the newly minted Fleet Admiral insignia on his collar. The promotion felt hollow, a bitter reminder of how far humanity had fallen. A chime at his door broke the silence. Jake pressed a button revealing Commander Sarah Chen. Her eyes darted nervously as she entered. "Status report, Commander?" Jake asked, voice low. Chen handed him a data pad. "Another alien world brought to heel, sir. New Washington demands immediate resource extraction." Jake's fists tight as he scrolled through images of Imperial troops rounding up civilians, demolishing cultural sites. He tossed the pad aside in disgust. "This isn't what we fought for," Jake growled. Chen nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "There are others who feel the same, sir. Quietly, of course." Jake's eyes narrowed. He studied Chen's face, seeing the unspoken question there. After a moment, he gave a slight nod. Over the next months, Jake carefully reached out to trusted officers. Encrypted messages, coded phrases, furtive meetings in forgotten corners of massive starships. A web of dissent grew, connecting those who remembered the ideals they once fought to protect. On the ravaged surface of the Bajoran homeworld, Thryn stood before a gathering of haggard survivors. His voice rang out, filled with rage and purpose. "They sought to exterminate us, to erase our very existence from the galaxy." Thryn's fist pounded against his chest. "But we endure. We will strike back against the empire that murdered our families, our culture, our future." The crowd roared its approval. Thryn smiled grimly, surveying the eager faces before him. These were not the broken remnants of a defeated people. These were the seeds of vengeance, ready to bloom in fire and blood. Months later, Jake's flagship approached the human colony on Proxima 7. As they entered orbit, alarms suddenly blared. "Multiple explosions planetside," his tactical officer shouted. "Sir, it's the capital city. It's gone." Jake watched in horror as mushroom clouds bloomed across the planet's surface. A transmission crackled through, filled with screams and chaos. "This is Governor Hartley. We're under attack. Bajoran terrorists. They've detonated antimatter bombs throughout the..." The signal cut to static. Jake gripped the arms of his command chair, bile rising in his throat. He'd seen the aftermath of Bajoran attacks before, but nothing on this scale. As rescue efforts began, the death toll climbed into the millions. In the wake of the Proxima 7's atrocity, the Empire's response was swift and brutal. Jake found himself summoned to an emergency war council on Earth. He entered a vast chamber filled with grim-faced military and political leaders. Emperor Vance's voice boomed across the room. "The time for half measures is over. We will crush this Bajoran insurgency once and for all. Any world harboring terrorists will be subject to immediate orbital bombardment. All alien populations are to be placed in containment camps for their own protection." Jake's blood ran cold. He opened his mouth to object, but a warning glance from a fellow officer made him hold his tongue. As the meeting adjourned, Jake felt the walls closing in. He knew then that open resistance was no longer an option. In the following weeks, Jake watched helplessly as the Empire's iron fist tightened its grip. Dissenting voices were silenced. Entire alien populations disappeared into sprawling prison complexes. Jake's every move was monitored, his communications scrutinized. Late one night, as Jake pored over classified reports in his quarters, his personal comlink chirped. A voice he didn't recognize spoke in clipped tones. The sword is forged in fire. The shield is tempered by sacrifice. Jake's breath caught. The Resistance code phrases. He keyed in his response. Your time has come, Admiral, the voice continued. We have made contact with the Bajoran leadership. Are you prepared to take the next step? Jake closed his eyes, weighing the magnitude of what was being asked. Everything he had worked for, everything he had sacrificed, had led to this moment. When he opened his eyes again, they burned with newfound purpose. The voice on the other end of the comm began to outline a plan that would shake the very foundations of the Empire. As Jake listened, he knew there was no turning back. The real war for the soul of humanity was about to begin. The voice on the comm faded, leaving Jake alone with the weight of his decision. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. There was no time to waste. Alarms blared throughout the ship as Jake strode onto the bridge. Status report, he barked. Commander Chen's face was ashen as she turned to him. Sir, we're detecting massive nuclear detonations across multiple sectors. It's spreading. Jake's stomach dropped as he watched the tactical display. A web of atomic fire was engulfing human space, each explosion triggering the next in a nightmarish chain reaction. Get me a secure channel to Thrin, Jake ordered, his voice tight. Moments later, the scarred face of the Bajoran insurgent leader appeared on screen. Jake spoke without preamble. You've seen what's happening. Thrin nodded grimly. The Empire's doomsday protocol, we always suspected. We need to work together, Jake said, the words bitter on his tongue, or there won't be anything left to fight over. A tense silence stretched between them. Finally, Thrin gave a curt nod. Agreed, what's our next move? Jake's mind raced. I still have contacts in Imperial High Command. Give me an hour. He worked feverishly, calling in favors and applying pressure to old allies. Finally, a breakthrough. Jake reconvened with Thrin, outlining what he'd learned. The central controls are on a classified weapons testing world, Jake explained. Heavily fortified. We'll need our best people. They assembled their strike team aboard Jake's flagship. Human rebels stood shoulder to shoulder with Bajoran fighters, united by desperation. As they approached the target planet, Jake addressed the gathered troops. I won't lie to you, this mission is nearly impossible, but if we fail, billions more will die. The ship rocked violently as they entered the atmosphere. Evasive maneuvers! Jake shouted as surface-to-air missiles streaked past the viewports. They crash-landed hard, the ship's hull screaming as it plowed a furrow across barren terrain. Jake pulled himself to his feet, helping others up. Move out! The team fought their way across the blasted landscape. Automated defense turrets opened fire, cutting down several fighters. Jake dove behind a rock outcropping, returning fire with his plasma rifle. There! Thrin shouted, pointing to a camouflaged bunker entrance. That has to be it. They breached the heavy blast doors, descending into the facility's bowels. Alarms wailed as they battled through squads of security droids. Finally, they reached the central control room. Banks of servers hummed ominously, displays showing the apocalypse's inexorable spread. Get to work, Jake ordered his tech team. He turned to Thrin. You said you had a virus? Thrin nodded, pulling out a data crystal. Let's hope it works. We're out of time, he shouted. In that moment, Jake saw only one option. He sprinted to the far wall, ripping open an access panel to reveal the pulsing core of the facility's geothermal reactor. What are you doing? Thrin yelled. Buying us time, Jake replied grimly. He plunged his hands into the searing energy field, screaming as radiation flooded his body, but he held on, redirecting power to keep the systems online. Through a haze of agony, Jake watched Thrin and the others work frantically. His vision blurred, skin blistering as seconds stretched into eternity. In the days that followed, Jake drifted in and out of consciousness. He caught snippets of reports, billions dead, worlds reduced to cinders, but humanity and the Bajorans had survived. He woke fully in a makeshift hospital. Thryn stood at his bedside looking uncertain. "The last Imperial holdouts have fallen," Thryn said quietly. We need to rebuild." Jake nodded weakly. He could feel death's approach, but there was one last task. "Listen carefully," he rasped. "There's still hope." "First tea." Jake's final words echoed in Thryn's mind as he stood before the assembled leaders of the fledgling republic. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, but there was no time for hesitation. Intelligence reports had confirmed their worst fears. The Zirions were developing a superweapon capable of annihilating entire star systems. Thryn's daughter Verok stepped forward. Her eyes burned with fierce commitment as she addressed the council. "We have one chance to stop this threat before it's unleashed. I've assembled a strike team for a covert mission to infiltrate and sabotage the Zirion weapon forge." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of voices, some supportive, others skeptical. Verok raised her hand, silencing the debate. "I know the risks, but if we don't act now, there won't be a republic left to defend." In the days that followed, Verok's strike force gathered in secret. Lieutenant Briggs, a seasoned Human Republic commando, stood at attention as Verok outlined their approach. Beside him, a towering figure loomed, Zartok, a Eurolian bounty hunter whose cybernetic enhancements gleamed in the dim light. "Our target is here," Verok said, bringing up a holographic display of an uncharted star cluster. "Intelligence suggests the forge is hidden within this nebula. We'll use a captured Zirion scout ship to slip past their patrols." The journey pushed their stolen vessel to its limits. Briggs white-knuckled the controls as they navigated a treacherous asteroid field, massive chunks of rock threatening to pulverize them at any moment. Zartok's enhanced senses proved invaluable as they evaded Zirion patrol ships, the cybernetic implants in his eyes detecting energy signatures long before they appeared on scanners. When they finally emerged from the swirling gases of the nebula, the sight before them stole their breath away. The nanosystem forge drifted silently in the void, an alien megastructure of impossible scale and complexity. They managed to dock in an unused hangar bay, the strike team fanning out in practiced formation. Verok split them into recon squads, their footsteps echoing through the labyrinthine corridors of the ancient forge. Briggs and his commandos crept along a dimly lit passageway, plasma rifles at the ready. Suddenly, the distinct whine of energy weapons erupted from around the corner. Verok's voice crackled over the comm. "Contact! Imperial collaborators!" Briggs signaled his team forward, rounding the corner to find Verok's Bajoran warriors pinned down by a hail of enemy fire. With practiced precision, the commandos unleashed a barrage of covering fire, allowing Verok's squad to advance. In the chaos of the firefight, Zartok's team made a chilling discovery. The Eurolian's voice cut through the din of battle. "We've found it. The weapon. It's operational." Briggs fought his way to Zartok's position, his blood running cold as he beheld the monstrosity before them. A pulsing singularity writhed at the heart of an impossibly complex focusing array, its gravitational force barely contained. "We need to overload the containment field," Briggs said, his mind racing. "It's the only way to be sure." As Zirion reinforcements closed in, Verok led a desperate charge toward the containment chamber. Briggs and his demotechs followed in her wake, setting charges as they went. A stray bolt of energy caught Verok square in the chest. She stumbled, falling to her knees. Briggs rushed to her side, but he could see the light fading from her eyes. "Promise me," Verok gasped, clutching at Briggs's armor. "Finish it at any expense." Briggs nodded, his mind focused tight. He stood, giving the order to evacuate the remaining squad members. As the last of the strike force retreated to their ship, Briggs activated the detonator. The forge shuddered as containment fields collapsed. Reality itself seemed to warp and twist as the artificial singularity broke free of its bonds. Briggs and Zartok raced for their vessel, the megastructure already beginning to tear itself apart around them. They barely made it aboard before the cataclysm truly began. Zartok's cybernetic reflexes were pushed to their limit as he piloted them through a storm of debris and exotic radiation. They jumped to hyperspace again and again, each time narrowly evading the expanding shockwave of destruction. When at last they emerged into the relative calm of Republican space, exhaustion and grief settled over the survivors. Briggs stared out at the stars, Verroc's final words echoing in his mind. The Zirian superweapon was destroyed, but at a terrible cost. As they limped towards home, Briggs knew their work was just the beginning. The Zirions would not give up so easily. He turned to Zartok, perseverance etched on his face. "We need to build something stronger, a real alliance, one that can stand against anything the Zirions throw at us." Zartok nodded, his cybernetic eye glowing faintly. "Where do we start?" Zartok nodded, his cybernetic eye glowing faintly. "Where do we start?" Before Briggs could respond, an urgent transmission crackled through the ship's comm system. "All personnel report to the war room immediately," Fleet Admiral Rowan's voice boomed. Minutes later, Briggs and Zartok stood amongst a crowd of Republic officers, the air thick with tension. Rowan's holographic form materialized at the center of the room, his face etched with lines of fatigue and stress. "The destruction of the nanosystem forge was a critical victory," Rowan began, "but the Zirian Imperial Alliance remains a grave threat. We must press our advantage." Rowan's eyes scanned the assembled faces. "I propose a full-scale offensive against their shipyards and resource worlds. We'll cripple their war machine before they can regroup." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, but Supreme Chancellor Thryn stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "A bold plan, Admiral. But we cannot ignore their command structure. We need a surgical strike to decapitate their leadership first." Thryn's gaze settled on Briggs. "Lieutenant, your actions at the forge were exemplary. I'm tasking you with leading this operation. Assemble your team and prepare to infiltrate the Zirian Central Command Nexus." Briggs felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He glanced at Zartok, who gave a subtle nod of agreement. "Yes, sir. We won't let you down." Over the next 48 hours, Briggs worked tirelessly to build his strike team. He handpicked the finest Republic Special Forces operatives, including Corpsman Nyler, a seasoned combat medic with nerves of steel. As they boarded their stealth shuttle, Briggs addressed his squad. "This mission is unlike anything we've faced before. We're going deep into enemy territory to hit them where it hurts. Stay sharp, stay focused, and watch each other's backs." The journey to the Zirian command world was tense and silent. As they approached their target, Zartok's cybernetic systems interfaced with the shuttle's cloaking technology, guiding them through gaps in the planet's defense grid. They touched down in a remote valley, the looming silhouette of the Nexus complex visible on the horizon. Briggs led his team through winding canyons, their adaptive camouflage blending seamlessly with the alien terrain. At the outer perimeter they encountered their first obstacle, a biometric security field. Zartok stepped forward, his cybernetic implants whirring as he analyzed the system. "I can spoof their sensors," he whispered, "but it'll only give us a small window." Briggs nodded. "Do it." With a series of rapid movements, Zartok overrode the security protocols. The team sprinted through the gap, narrowly avoiding patrolling Zirian sentries. Inside the sprawling underground complex, Briggs split his force. "Zartok, take your group and create a diversion. We'll make for the central core." As Zartok's team moved out, Briggs led his unit deeper into the facility. The corridors twisted and turned, lined with pulsing bioorganic circuitry. They encountered scattered resistance, quickly neutralizing Zirian guards with precision shots. Suddenly alarms blared throughout the complex. "Intruder alert. Imperial forces detected in Sector 7. The false transmission from Zartok's team had the desired effect, drawing security forces away from their true objective. Briggs and his squad pressed on, fighting their way through increasingly heavy resistance. Zirian cyborg infantry unleashed a barrage of energy weapons, forcing them to take cover behind twisted metal bulkheads. "Nyler, suppressing fire! Zeta team, flank left!" Briggs shouted over the din of battle. They fought their way forward, inch by bloody inch, until they finally breached the central Nexus core. What Briggs saw there defied comprehension. The Zirian overseer loomed before them, a nightmarish fusion of alien flesh and hyper-advanced technology. Multiple heads writhed atop a massive pulsating body, suspended in a nutrient tank. "Plant the charges," Briggs ordered, his voice steady despite the horror before him. As his team set to work, he stepped forward, locking eyes with the grotesque entity. In an instant, Briggs felt his mind invaded by an overwhelming alien presence. He staggered, nearly falling to his knees as wave after wave of Zirian military intelligence crashed over him. "Sir," Nyla's voice seemed to come from far away. "The virus is ready." Briggs gritted his teeth, focusing every ounce of his will to resist the psychic onslaught. "Do it," he managed to growl. As Nyla uploaded the virus, Briggs felt the alien presence in his mind begin to fragment and dissolve. The Overseer's many mouths opened in a silent scream as its vast intellect was systematically erased. They fought their way back through the complex, linking up with Zartok's team at the extraction point. As their shuttle lifted off, the Zirian command nexus erupted in a series of massive explosions. Back aboard the Republic flagship, Briggs delivered his report to a grim-faced Admiral Rowan. "The mission was a success, sir. Zirion command structure is in chaos." Rowan nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "Well done, Lieutenant, but we've uncovered something disturbing." He paused, pain evident in his eyes. "There's a traitor in our midst. Someone's been feeding information to the enemy." Briggs felt a chill run down his spine as Rowan continued. "It's Admiral Halston. He's been working with the Zirians all along." The weight of betrayal settled over the room. Briggs remembered Halston, a decorated war hero, Jake Parker's old comrade. How could this have happened? Rowan's voice was heavy as he spoke. "I need to decide what to do about Halston, but right now we have an opportunity we can't waste. Prepare your teams, Lieutenant. We're taking the fight to the Zirians while they're still reeling." As Briggs saluted and turned to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that this war was just the beginning. The real battles, it seemed, were just beginning. Rowan's face twisted with pain and fury. "Intel from the Zirion command nexus confirms it. That bastard's been feeding them our secrets for months." Rowan nodded. "Granted, bring that son of a bitch in." The next hours blurred into a frantic pursuit. Briggs and his team raced from shipyard to starbase, always one step behind Halston. Intel tracked the traitor's flagship to the Epsilon sector, prepping for a jump to Zirian space. "We've got one shot at this," Briggs told his squad as their assault shuttle rocketed towards Halston's vessel. "Disable that hyperdrive at all costs." They breached the hull with precisely placed charges. Alarms blared as Briggs led the charge down smoke-filled corridors. Halston's loyalists met them with a hail of plasma fire. "Push forward," Briggs shouted, ducking behind a bulkhead as energy bolts sizzled past. Zartok's cybernetic eye glowed as he targeted weak points in the enemy formation. They fought their way to the bridge, leaving a trail of stunned and incapacitated crew in their wake. The doors hissed open, revealing Admiral Halston at the helm. Briggs aimed his weapon. "It's over, Admiral. Stand down." Halston's weathered face twisted into a sneer. "You fool!" He whipped out a sidearm, firing in one fluid motion. "The Republic is finished," Halston raved, his eyes wild. "The Zirians are humanity's only hope." A precise shot from Corpsman Nyla dropped Halston before he could fire again. As Nyla rushed to treat Briggs' wound, alarms shrieked to life. "Self-destruct sequence initiated," an emotionless computer voice announced. "Zartok," Briggs choked out. "Override it." The Aurolian's fingers flew over the console, but to no avail. "It's locked out. We have minutes before total antimatter containment failure." Briggs struggled to his feet, ignoring the searing pain in his chest. "We need options now." Zartok's cybernetic eye pulsed rapidly. "There's a chance I can rig an emergency wormhole shunt. It's unstable, but it might get us clear." "Do it," Briggs ordered. As Zartok worked, Nyla secured the unconscious Halston. The ship shuddered ominously around them. They piled into the escape shuttles, dragging Halston's limp form with them. The wormhole crackled to life, a swirling vortex of impossible energies. The shuttles plunged into the makeshift wormhole, just as Holston's flagship detonated in a blinding flash of light. They tumbled through a maelstrom of twisted space-time before erupting back into normal space, the shockwave of the explosion hot on their heels. As they regrouped with the Republic fleet, the full horror of Halston's betrayal became clear. The antimatter blast had created an ion trail leading straight to the heart of Republic space. Briggs watched in helpless rage as the first wave of Zirion ships poured through the newly formed hyperspace corridor. Weapons of unimaginable power lashed out, reducing entire planets to cinders. "All ships, emergency evacuation protocols." Admiral Rowan's voice crackled over the comms. "Initiate scorched earth procedures. We cannot let a single scrap of tech fall into Zirion hands." Briggs' team raced to their assault craft, preparing to join the desperate counterattack. As they lifted off, Zartok spoke up. Briggs nodded grimly. "It's our only shot. We'll need to punch through their lines to reach it." They rocketed into the fray, dodging energy beams and debris as entire fleets clashed around them. Through the viewports, Briggs watched Republic worlds burn. "This ends now," he growled, plotting a course for the neutron star. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and they were rapidly running out of time. The assault craft tore through the void, engines straining as they pushed towards the Sivara system. Briggs gripped the controls, his squeezing hard with tension. Through the view screen, he watched the twisted energies of the subspace corridor disgorge wave after wave of Zirion ships. The Aurolian's cybernetic eye pulsed rapidly. Finalizing now. The neutron star's gravitational flux is highly unstable. We'll need precise timing to trigger the implosion. As they entered the system, alarms blared. Zirion interceptors swarmed towards them, energy weapons blazing. Briggs yanked the controls, sending the craft into a wild spiral. "Evasive maneuvers! All hands prepare for combat!" he shouted. The strike force split apart, each ship becoming a blur of motion. Plasma bolts crisscrossed the void. Briggs felt the deck shudder as a near miss grazed their shields. "There!" Zartok pointed to a decrepit station barely visible against the neutron star's blinding glow. "Republic signatures detected." Briggs nodded grimly. "Let's hope they're still alive. Nyla, prep for boarding. We're going in hot." The assault craft slammed into the station's docking bay, its hull screeching against metal. As the airlock cycled, Briggs and his team stormed out, weapons at the ready. They found the station's crew huddled in the command center, emaciated but alive. The lead technician, his voice hoarse from disuse, quickly briefed them on the Zirion's plan. "They've been destabilizing the star for months," he croaked, pointing to a display showing pulsing energy streams. "It's primed to collapse on command." Briggs' mind raced. "Can we hijack their detonation sequence?" The technician nodded weakly. "Theoretically, but you'll need to seize control of the gravity disruptor array. It's heavily guarded." "Then that's our target," Briggs declared. He turned to his team. "Zartok, get to work on those detonation codes. Nylor, you're with me. We're taking that array." They fought their way across the station, Zirion defenders pouring fire from every corridor. Briggs and Nylor moved in perfect sync, covering each other as they advanced. The gravity array loomed before them, a massive structure thrumming with barely contained power. Zirion troops swarmed its base. "Go loud!" Briggs roared, hurling a cluster of sonic grenades. The ensuing battle was chaos. Energy bolts sizzled past Briggs's head as he dove for cover. Nyla's rifle barked a steady rhythm, each shot finding its mark. They clawed their way forward inch by bloody inch. Briggs watched in horror as a Zirion blast caught Nylor in the chest, sending him sprawling. "Man down!" Briggs shouted, dragging his comrade to safety. With a final push, they seized the array. Briggs' hands flew over the controls, establishing a link with Zartok. Zartok's voice crackled over the comm. "Detonation code's cracked, but there's a problem. It needs the Zirion commander's neural imprint to activate." Briggs looked down at Nyla. his friend's breathing labored. The wounded soldier met his gaze, understanding passing between them. "I'll do it," Nylor gasped. "Hook me in, use my life signs to trick the system." Briggs hesitated, torn between duty and friendship. "Nylor, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking," Nylor interrupted, a faint smile on his bloodied face. "I'm volunteering. Now let's save the goddamn galaxy." With trembling hands, Briggs connected Nylor to the array. The system pulsed, accepting the false imprint. "It's working," Zartok's voice rang out. "Initiating detonation sequence." Through the viewport, Briggs witnessed a sight beyond comprehension. The fabric of space itself seemed to tear as the shockwave pierced the subspace corridor. In a blinding flash, the entire Zirian armada vanished, scattered to the far reaches of the universe. As alarms blared and the station began to break apart, Briggs cast one last look at Nylor's still form. "Thank you, old friend," he whispered, before racing for the escape pods. Briggs stared out the viewport of the Republic flagship, his eyes fixed on the scarred remains of New Terra. Once a thriving colony world, now reduced to a patchwork of glowing craters and blackened wastelands. The Zirion bombardment had been merciless, indiscriminate. "Lieutenant Briggs, report to the bridge immediately." Admiral Rowan's voice crackled over the intercom. Briggs found Rowan hunched over a holographic display, his face haggard from sleepless nights overseeing evacuation efforts. The Admiral's eyes lit up as Briggs entered. "And we've got something," Rowan said, gesturing to the swirling mass of data before him. Long-range probes picked up residual energy signatures in the outer rim. "It's them." Briggs leaned in, studying the faint trails crisscrossing uncharted space. The Zirians survived. "A portion of their fleet, at least," Rowan confirmed. "Scattered, but still a threat. We need eyes on them, Briggs. I'm putting together a reconnaissance team. You'll lead it." Over the next few days, Briggs assembled his squad. Zartok, the Aurolian mercenary, was an obvious choice. His cybernetic enhancements would be invaluable in the treacherous conditions of the Outer Rim. "These new drives," Zartok mused, running his hands over the sleek hull of their scout ship. "They replicate the subspace shunt that scattered the Zirians." As they prepared to depart, Rowan pulled Briggs aside. "This isn't just about gathering intel," the Admiral said in a low voice. "If you find a weakness, exploit it. We can't afford another full-scale invasion." Briggs saluted, the weight of the mission settling on his shoulders. "Understood, sir. We won't let you down." The journey into the Outer Rim was grueling. For months they navigated treacherous stellar phenomena, each day bringing new dangers. They skirted the edges of accretion disks, their sensors straining to detect the faintest Zirion signatures. "There," Zartok called out one day, his cybernetic eye pulsing rapidly. "Energy spike at bearing 047. They followed the trail to a distant stellar nursery, a cosmic graveyard of forming stars and primordial gas clouds. As they entered the system, proximity alarms blared. Before they could react, space itself seemed to ripple. Zirian hunter-killer ships materialized around them, energy weapons already charging. The first volley tore through their escort ships. Briggs watched in horror as the small fleet he'd led into this death trap was systematically annihilated. Their own ship rocked violently as a glancing hit overloaded their shields. "We can't take another hit like that," Zartok growled, his fingers flying over the controls. "There's a subspace anomaly nearby. If we can reach it—" Briggs didn't hesitate. "Do it!" They plunged into the swirling rift, the pursuing Zirians unable to follow. Inside they found themselves buffeted by intense particle storms, the ship's hull groaning under the strain. As they rode out the tempest, Zartok worked feverishly to decrypt intercepted Zirian transmissions. What he discovered chilled Briggs to the bone. "They're rebuilding," Zartok reported grimly. "Salvaging their wrecked ships, constructing a new armada, and that's not the worst of it." Zartok's organic eye narrowed. "They're taking prisoners. Humans, Imperial defectors, captured Republic personnel, anyone they can get their hands on. And they're changing them." Changing them how? Briggs demanded. Cybernetic augmentation, Zartok replied. Forcibly converting them into some kind of shock troops. They're building an army, Briggs, and they're using our own people to do it. He turned to the battered remnants of his team. We're going to hit them where it hurts, disrupt their supply lines, sabotage their shipyards, free as many prisoners as we can. We buy the Republic time to prepare, and we show these bastards that humanity isn't going down without a fight. As they emerged from the rift, ready to begin their guerrilla campaign, Briggs knew the real war was just beginning. The Xerians had survived, adapted, and now posed a threat greater than ever before. But this time, they'd be ready. Commander Briggs stood at attention in Admiral Rowan's office, his newly adorned uniform still stiff and unfamiliar. Years had passed since the Xerion campaign, but the memories remained fresh. Briggs relaxed his stance. What's the problem, sir? Rowan activated a holographic display, showing a pulsing red dot in an unexplored region of space. One of our long-range probes went dark after detecting an anomaly here. It's adjacent to former Xerion territory. Briggs leaned in, studying the map. Could be natural phenomena. Or it could be something far worse, Rowan countered. I need you to assemble a strike force and investigate multi-species. We can't afford to take any chances. Within days, Briggs found himself aboard the USS Sentinel, a state-of-the-art recon frigate. He'd handpicked his team, a mix of seasoned human veterans, Bajoran infiltration experts, and Irolian tactical specialists. And, of course, Zartok. The Irolian mercenary's cybernetic eye whirred as he examined the ship's stealth systems. Impressive tech, Briggs. Think it'll be enough? Briggs shrugged. Let's hope we don't have to find out. As they approached the anomaly's coordinates, tension gripped the bridge. Ensign Tala, a young Bajoran, called out from her station, Sir, I'm detecting debris scattered throughout this sector. The view screen flickered to life, revealing a vast field of twisted metal and shattered hull fragments. Zartok zoomed in on a particularly large piece. That's not Republic design, he muttered, or Xerion. Before Briggs could respond, the ship lurched violently. Alarms blared as gravimetric pulses slammed into the Sentinel, tearing through shields and hull plating alike. Briggs steadied himself against a console. All hands, damage control. Zartok, get those security lockdowns in place. Through the viewscreen, massive shapes began to materialize within the debris field. Flashes of eerie bioluminescence outlined colossal silhouettes that dwarfed even the largest Republic vessels. Briggs watched in horror as the Titans converged on their crippled ship. Zartok, what are we dealing with? The Irolian's fingers flew over his console. Bioscans indicate, Briggs, these aren't ships, they're alive. Organic constructs engineered for space combat. Realization dawned as Briggs took a closer look at the surrounding debris. Those aren't destroyed ships, they're exoskeletons. We've stumbled into some kind of birthing ground. A violent impact rocked the ship once more. Briggs steadied himself, his mind racing. All hands prepare to evacuate to the saucer section. We're jettisoning the drive module. As crew members scrambled to comply, a monstrous shape emerged from the swirling debris cloud. An Alpha-class X-Ridion, its armored hide overflowing with bioweaponry. Oh shit, Zartok breathed. The Alpha unleashed a barrage of gravimetric lances, shredding through the Sentinel's armor. Briggs felt the deck lurch beneath his feet as massive tendrils latched onto the hull. Fall back to the bridge, he shouted, drawing his sidearm. Zartok, with me! They retreated through corridors rapidly being consumed by alien biology. The bridge doors hissed shut behind them, emergency bulkheads slamming into place. Briggs and Zartok stood back to back, weapons raised as the sounds of tearing metal echoed around them. Their firepower seemed laughably inadequate against the cosmic horror they now faced. Just as hope began to fade, a new alarm blared. Tala's eyes widened as she checked her readings. Sir, multiple Republic signatures incoming. Through the viewscreen, Briggs watched as a battle cluster led by Vice Admiral Vran's flagship dropped out of warp. Streams of plasma fire and antimatter warheads lit up space, tearing through the embryonic X-Ridion horde. The Alpha-class beast released its grip on the Sentinel, wheeling to face this new threat. It never stood a chance. A Soul Force breacher torpedo struck dead center, vaporizing the creature in a blinding flash. As Vran's flagship moved to retrieve the battered Sentinel, Briggs slumped against a bulkhead. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead as the adrenaline began to fade. "Zartok," he said weakly, "we need to warn them. This is just the beginning." The Aurolian nodded grimly, helping Briggs to his feet. As they limped towards the waiting rescue shuttles, both knew that the galaxy would never be the same. The cavernous war room buzzed with tense energy as Fleet Admiral Rowan surveyed the assembled group. Holographic displays flickered, casting an eerie blue glow across the faces of grim-faced military strategists, wide-eyed exobiologists, and the haunted survivors of Briggs's recon team. Rowan's voice cut through the murmur of hushed conversations. "Let's begin. Commander Briggs, please recount your encounter for the assembled specialists." Briggs stepped forward, his uniform still bearing scorch marks from the recent battle. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "We entered what we thought was a debris field. It wasn't debris, it was them, the X-Ridians." He tapped a control, and a three-dimensional image of the titanic creatures filled the room. Gasps echoed as the full scale of the threat became apparent. "Their biology defies conventional understanding," an exobiologist interjected, her voice trembling. "These aren't just large organisms, they're living weapons, evolved for cosmic-scale destruction." 10 intelligence reports flashed across screens, detailing the X-Ridians' horrifying reproductive cycle. Briggs watched as the color drained from faces around the room. "Even in their juvenile state, a single gravimetric pulse nearly tore our ship apart," Zartok added, his cybernetic eye whirring as he recalled the encounter. "Our most advanced weapons barely scratched them." The summit dragged on for hours as the full implications sank in. Scenarios were modeled, each more catastrophic than the last. The room fell silent as the final assessment was presented, the potential unraveling of space-time itself in the wake of a full X-Ridion incursion. Rowan's eyes sharp as he processed the information. He stood, his decision made. "Activate Project Elphion immediately." Hushed whispers rippled through the room. Project Elphion had long been considered too dangerous to implement. "Sir," a scientist protested, "the risks of creating artificial singularities on that scale are less than the alternative," Rowan cut him off. "We need those Void Lances operational yesterday." He turned to a team of engineers. "The Asridian Pulse Drive. How soon can we have a working prototype?" "A week, sir, maybe days if we push the teams to the brink." The newly promoted Rear Admiral snapped to attention. "Assemble your Xeno Vanguard Strike Corps. Your primary objective is to locate and neutralize X-Ridion spawn sites before they can mature. The fate of known space rests on your success." As the meeting adjourned, Briggs felt the weight of his new responsibility settle onto his shoulders. He caught Zartok's eye across the room, a silent understanding passing between them. The real war was just beginning. Outside the war room, shipyards hummed with frantic activity. Skeletal frames of new super warships took shape, their hull plates gleaming under the harsh lights of orbital construction facilities. Engineers swarmed over half-finished weapons systems, racing against time to prepare for the coming storm. In a nearby observatory, a young technician's eyes widened as she studied her readouts. She grabbed her supervisor's arm, pointing to a series of alarming gravitational distortions spreading across the frontier. The harbingers of doom were approaching, faster than anyone had anticipated. Rear Admiral Briggs stood rigid on the bridge of his command frigate, the USS Harbinger. His eyes scanned the rapidly updating holographic displays, tracking the intensifying gravimetric distortions that heralded the approach of X-Ridion brood migrations. The Aurolian operative's cybernetic eye whirred as he processed the incoming data. "Multiple anomalies detected, sir. The strongest reading is coming from a molecular cloud at the edge of the Cygnus arm." Briggs nodded grimly. "That's where we encountered the last birthing wake. Prep the Xeno Vanguard for immediate deployment." Within hours, a fleet of sleek arrowhead frigates sliced through the void, their stealth systems engaged. Briggs watched from the Harbinger's viewport as they approached the roiling mass of cosmic dust and gas. "All ships prepare for cloud penetration," he ordered over the comm. "Brace for graviton interference." The frigates plunged into the molecular maelstrom. Almost immediately, violent eddies of quantum energy slammed into their hulls. Briggs stumbled as a particularly vicious surge rocked the Harbinger. "Hull integrity at 72% and dropping," a technician called out. The ship's energy grid flickered and dimmed as power was rerouted. The hull groaned under the strain but held. As they pushed deeper into the cloud's heart, sensor probes pierced the quantum haze. Zartok's organic eye widened as he interpreted the readings. "Sir, we've got massive energy spikes dead ahead. It's happening." The Harbinger shuddered as it released its payload. Across the fleet, other frigates followed suit, establishing a wide perimeter around the anomaly's nexus. Suddenly, a violent tremor tore through subspace. The cloud before them began to churn and boil, reality itself seeming to tear apart. "Hags Ridion emergence," Zartok shouted. "Multiple biosignatures detected." Through the swirling chaos, Briggs watched in horror as titanic forms began to extrude from the rift. Colossal tentacles, each larger than his entire ship, lashed out blindly. The Harbinger's engines screamed as it dove, narrowly avoiding being crushed. Other ships weren't so lucky. Briggs watched helplessly as support vessels were swatted aside like insects, instantly vaporized by the sheer energies radiating from the newborn X-Ridians. Briggs nodded grimly. "All ships emergency warp pulse, get us clear of the vortex." As the Harbinger's warp drive engaged, Briggs caught a final glimpse of the horror unfolding behind them. Massive, bulbous structures were emerging from the rift, living incubators teeming with billions of X-Ridian spawn. Once clear, Briggs wasted no time. "Detonate the mines, all of them, now!" A beat of silence. Then a blinding flash erupted from the cloud's core. The shockwave rippled outward, tearing through the nursery structures and shattering the half-formed X-Ridian broods within. As the extinction pulse expanded, Briggs allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. But he knew this victory was fleeting. The true test was yet to come. "Set course for the singularity array," he ordered, his voice heavy with the weight of what was to come. "It's time to end this, once and for all." Rear Admiral Briggs stood motionless on the bridge of the USS Harbinger, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. The gravimetric distortions pulsed ominously, heralding the imminent arrival of a new X-Ridian brood. He knew their time had run out. "Zartok," Briggs said, his voice low and controlled. "Transmit authorization code Omega-9 Delta to Fleet Admiral Rowan. It's time for Operation Godkiller." The Aurolian's organic eye widened as he processed the implications. "Sir, are you certain?" As Zartok's fingers danced across the console, initiating the coded transmission, Briggs turned to address the bridge crew. "All hands, prepare for immediate jump to the Killian Void. We're activating Project Elphion." The Harbinger's engines thrummed to life, propelling the ship through the fabric of space. As they emerged in the uncharted system, a massive structure loomed before them, the culmination of years of secret development. Briggs watched as thousands of synchronized energy beams converged at the array's central nexus. The void itself seemed to twist and warp as exotic particles coalesced into a rapidly expanding event horizon. "Sir," a sensor technician called out, "the singularity is forming. Mass intake is accelerating beyond projected parameters." Massive focusing arrays crackled with energy, channeling the newly formed black hole's output into a superheated plasma stream. Tractor beams lashed out, shattering nearby celestial bodies and feeding their remains into the growing anomaly. Briggs keyed his comm. "All ships, this is Rear Admiral Briggs. Commence Operation Angler. Use the array's gravimetric signature to draw in the X-Ridion broods." The fleet scattered, taking up pre-assigned positions around the Kylian system. Minutes crawled by as they waited, the tension on the bridge palpable. Suddenly alarms blared. "Multiple contacts," Zartok shouted. "Exridion Alphas incoming from all vectors." Briggs watched as the monstrous bio-dreadnoughts surged toward them, drawn by the Singularity's gravitational song. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what came next. Space itself seemed to tear open as the hidden network of Singularity rings sprang to life. The Exridion hulks, caught in the gravimetric maelstrom, found their unstoppable momentum suddenly and violently reversed. Briggs's voice cut through the chaos. "All ships, open fire! Hit them with everything we've got!" The void lit up with antimatter detonations and lancing beams of coherent energy. Exridion bioforms, each larger than a capital ship, thrashed in silent agony as they were pummeled on their inexorable journey toward oblivion. "Containment fields failing," Zartok shouted over the din of buckling metal. "The Singularity is going critical." Briggs stumbled to his command chair, his mind racing. There was only one option left, one final terrible gambit. "Prep the Asridion drive," he ordered, his voice barely audible over the ship's death throes. "We're going to channel this thing away from populated space." As the last of his fleet was consumed by the ravenous void, Briggs initiated the inverse hyperpulse. Reality itself seemed to scream as the Harbinger's engines tore a hole in the fabric of space-time. The Harbinger lurched forward, dragging the hyper-energized Singularity in its wake. Briggs watched as entire star systems blurred past, knowing that with each passing moment they were leaving their home galaxy behind forever. As the cosmic maelstrom finally began to dissipate, Briggs slumped in his chair. They had survived, but at what cost? The Exridion threat remained, poised to consume everything they had left behind. Briggs straightened, his eyes fixed on the unfamiliar stars ahead. "Now," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of what they had done, "we find a new home, and we prepare, because this fight is just the beginning." The USS Harbinger drifted silently through the void, its hull scorched and scarred. From the cosmic maelstrom it had barely survived. Rear Admiral Briggs stood on the darkened bridge, the emergency lighting casting eerie shadows across his gaunt face. The ship's systems sputtered and wheezed, barely functional after their high-stakes endeavor. Zartok's cybernetic eye whirred as he processed the data from his flickering console. "Life support at 12% capacity, sir. Warp drive offline. Subspace communications non-existent." Briggs nodded grimly. He could feel the oppressive weight of the twisted space-time around them, a constant reminder of their isolation in this pocket of warped reality. Days blurred into an endless stream of crisis management. Briggs watched as his crew worked tirelessly, their faces hollowed by exhaustion and dwindling rations. The ship's corridors echoed with the labored wheezing of failing air recyclers. As the last of their supplies dwindled, Briggs found himself staring out into the vast emptiness that had once been the Keelian system. The void seemed to mock them, a stark reminder of their impending doom. Suddenly a faint beeping cut through the oppressive silence. Zartok's organic eye widened in disbelief. "Sir, I'm detecting a quantum signature. It's Republic." Briggs rushed to the sensor display, hope surging through his veins for the first time in weeks. There, barely visible against the backdrop of twisted space, was the unmistakable outline of a Republic deep-range explorer. "It's unmanned," Zartok reported, his fingers dancing across the console. "But its sensors have locked onto our position. It's opening a transwarp conduit." Briggs' mind raced. This could be their only chance at survival. "All hands prepare for emergency transit. We're going to ride that conduit out of here." The bridge erupted into frantic activity. Warning klaxons blared as the Harbinger's battered systems strained to interface with the Explorer's transwarp field. "Sir, the conduit is unstable," a technician shouted over the din. "We have seconds at most." Briggs gripped the command chair, his nucleus tightening. "Punch it now!" The Harbinger lurched forward, plunging into the swirling maw of the transwarp tunnel. For a heart-stopping moment, Briggs felt his body stretch to its atomic limits as they hurtled through the fabric of space-time. Then, with a violent shudder, They were ejected into a sea of utter blackness. Briggs blinked, struggling to orient himself in the featureless void. "Where are we?" he demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. Zartok's reply was tinged with awe and fear. "Unknown, sir, there are no stellar markers, no recognizable constellations. We're adrift in intergalactic space." Briggs felt the weight of their situation settle onto his shoulders. They had escaped one prison, only to find themselves trapped in an even vaster one. But they were alive, and where there was life, there was hope. "Set a course," he ordered, his voice steady despite the uncertainty that gnawed at him. "Any direction, we'll find our way home." And so they pressed on, limping through the endless night between galaxies. Days stretched into weeks, then months. The crew's spirits waned as they traveled through the cosmic desert, with no end in sight. Briggs found himself spending long hours on the bridge, scanning the void for any sign of hope. It was during one of these vigils that a faint blip caught his eye. The Aurolian's cybernetic eye whirred as he focused on the long-range scanner readout. "Confirmed, sir. It's a quantum footprint, artificial in origin." Briggs leaned in, studying the signal. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, a sprawling network of energy signatures that defied conventional understanding. "Not Republic tech," he mused aloud. "Something older, much older." As they drew closer, the true scale of what lay before them began to reveal itself. Massive structures loomed in the darkness, their architecture so alien and vast that it defied comprehension. And through it all, faint pulses of energy, distress beacons calling out from the heart of this celestial necropolis. Briggs straightened, his eyes fixed on the titanic alien vessel that lay at the center of the gravitational maelstrom. "Take us in," he ordered, his voice barely audible over the groaning of the Harbinger's overtaxed systems. "Whatever happened here, we need to find out." As they navigated the treacherous debris field, Briggs couldn't shake the feeling that they were disturbing something ancient and terrible. The sheer scale of destruction around them spoke of a cataclysm beyond imagining. And as they drew ever closer to the alien derelict, a chilling thought took root in Briggs's mind. Had their actions in the Killian void somehow awakened an echo of the force that had wrought such devastation? The possibility sent a shiver down his spine as they prepared to dock with the massive alien vessel. Briggs and his crew clambered through the cavernous halls of the derelict alien vessel, their boots clanging against ancient metal floors. Emergency lamps cast eerie shadows as they hauled power conduits behind them. "Careful with those connections," Briggs barked, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "One wrong move and we'll fry what's left of this ship's systems." Zartok's cybernetic eye whirred as he scanned the alien circuitry. "These power couplings are unlike anything I've ever seen, sir. It's going to take some creative engineering to make this work." Suddenly the deck plates beneath their feet vibrated. Dust shook loose from overhead as dormant systems sputtered to life. "We've got something," a technician shouted. "Power readings are climbing." Briggs allowed himself a moment of hope before reality set in. "All right, people, we've got a foothold, but we're not out of the woods yet. Let's find that central processing nexus." They pressed deeper into the alien ship, leaving behind the relative safety of their own vessel. Briggs tried not to think about the dwindling air and power reserves they'd left behind. After what felt like hours of searching, they stumbled upon a massive spherical chamber. At its center pulsed a crystalline structure, flickering with faint internal light. "This is it," Briggs breathed, "the AI core." He approached the alien construct, his neural implant tingling as it detected unfathomable data streams. Without hesitation, Briggs activated his uplink protocols. But it was too late. Briggs gasped as his consciousness exploded outward, merging with the ancient AI. A torrent of information flooded his synapses. He saw it all, the rise of the Iotherans, their empire spanning impossibly vast regions of space, the technological marvels they created. Dyson spheres harnessing the power of entire stars, gateways that bent the very fabric of reality. Then came the horror, a cancerous void consuming everything in its path. Briggs witnessed entire worlds vanish, pulled into rifts of non-existence. The desperate measures taken by the Iotherans grew more extreme with each passing century. He experienced the final terrible gambit, the Asridian Protocol. Briggs felt the anguish of billions as they underwent nightmarish transformations, preparing for an exodus beyond comprehension. The memories crescendoed to a deafening climax. Briggs saw through the eyes of the ship's crew as reality itself shattered around them. Then, nothing. The walls of the chamber seemed to ripple and shift. Briggs blinked, unable to trust his senses. He stepped into a corridor and found himself in a different section of the ship entirely. Skeletal figures shuffled past, ignoring him completely as they carried out long-forgotten tasks. Briggs realized with mounting dread that he was witnessing echoes of the past, present, and future all overlapping. His mind struggled to process the input. Somehow he retained a fragile grasp on his identity, even as he felt himself stretched across countless potential realities. In that moment of cosmic awareness, Briggs detected something. A faint signal pulsing with multidimensional harmonics. He focused, drawn to its intricate patterns. As he delved deeper into the signal's structure, Briggs began to unravel its secrets. Within the complex interference patterns lay information beyond imagining, the key to a hyperdrive system that could traverse realities themselves. The implications staggered him. This knowledge could be the salvation not just of humanity, but of all life in the cosmos. As his grasp on linear time faded, Briggs clung to this revelation, determined to find a way to bring this vital information back to his own reality, if such a thing still existed for him. Briggs' fingers danced across the alien console, his neural implant humming as it interfaced with the ancient Iotheran systems. The derelict's vast chamber thrummed with energy as he worked, sweat beading on his brow. "Reroute auxiliary power to the cyclonic accelerator," he barked, not taking his eyes off the flickering holographic displays. "We need every ounce of juice we can get." Her junior technician scrambled to comply, her face pale in the eerie blue glow of the ship's emergency lighting. "Sir, the manifolds are reaching critical coherence. We're skating on thin ice here." Briggs nodded grimly. "I know, but we don't have a choice. Initiate the transfer sequence." The air crackled with ozone as streams of data flowed from Briggs' neural implant into the ship's systems. He gasped, his body rigid as the hyperdrive algorithms poured through him and into the nav computer's auxiliary matrices. "Cyclonic accelerator online," shouted the chief engineer. "Subspace vortex forming. Now!" The deck plates shuddered beneath their feet as reality itself began to warp and twist. Through the viewport, Briggs watched as the stars blurred into streaks of light, then vanished entirely as they plunged into the hyper-dimensional slipstream. For what seemed like an eternity compressed into mere heartbeats, the crew experienced a kaleidoscope of sensations beyond human comprehension. Then, with a violent lurch that sent them sprawling, they burst back into normal space. Alarms blared as Briggs hauled himself to his feet. "Status report." "We've made it, sir," the nav officer replied, her voice tinged with awe. "We're on the outskirts of Republic space." But Briggs's relief was short-lived. As sensor data flooded in, his blood ran cold. The familiar star patterns were there, yes, but amid them floated countless chunks of debris. Radiation levels spiked off the charts, and gravimetric anomalies warped the very fabric of space around them. "What in God's name?" Briggs whispered, leaning in to study the sensor readouts. Suddenly the comm system crackled to life. A cacophony of voices, thick with static and panic, filled the bridge. "They're everywhere. Oh God, they're in the hull. They're... You'll hast stand at Proxima Centauri. We need reinforcements." Briggs's hands clenched into fists as the grim reality sank in. They had returned home, only to find it under siege by an unimaginable threat. As they pressed deeper into the star cluster, the true horror of the situation revealed itself. Through the main view screen, Briggs watched in stunned silence as a vast alien armada came into view, massive organic structures pulsing with sickly bioluminescence, stretched as far as the eye could see. "Ixridian," the xenobiologist whispered, her face ashen. "It can't be." But it was. As they watched, a Republic battlecruiser, its hull already half consumed by writhing tendrils, exploded in a brilliant flash. The Exridian swarm engulfed the debris, assimilating it into their ever-growing mass. Briggs felt the weight of untold lives pressing down upon him. The encrypted Iotharan knowledge in his mind held the key to salvation, but at what cost? As distress calls continued to pour in, he knew he faced a decision that would shape the fate of not just humanity, but of the entire galaxy. Briggs's fingers flew across the alien control panels, his neural implants burning as they interfaced with the ancient Iotharan systems. Sweat dripped from his brow, stinging his eyes as he worked feverishly to activate the Asridian manifold projector. Chief Engineer Voss scrambled to comply, her face pale in the flickering emergency lights. "Sir, we're pushing the reactor beyond safe limits. Any more and we risk a core breach." Briggs didn't even look up from his work. Do it anyway. If we fail here, a reactor meltdown will be the least of our problems. The deck plates shuddered beneath their feet as the derelict vessel's systems strained under the immense power draw. Through the viewport, Briggs watched in horror as the encroaching void consumed swathes of proto-matter, leaving behind an absolute nothingness that hurt the eyes to look at. "Manifold projector online," shouted the sensor officer. "Cryon harmonic barrier forming us now." A shimmering field of energy erupted from the bow of the ship, spreading outward in a rapidly expanding sphere. Where it met the advancing wave of oblivion, reality itself seemed to warp and twist. Briggs gripped the edge of the console, his squeezing hard as he watched the titanic forces collide. For a moment that stretched into eternity, the barrier held firm against the onslaught. Then, with a sound like reality itself tearing apart, cracks began to form in the cryon harmonic field. "It's not enough," Briggs muttered, his mind racing. "We need more power, more—" Suddenly his neural implants flared to life, flooding his consciousness with a torrent of Iotharan data. In that moment of clarity, Briggs saw the solution. "Voss," he shouted, "reverse the polarity on the gravitic induction manifolds. We're going to use the buffer continuum's own energies to reinforce the barrier." The chief engineer's eyes widened in understanding. "But sir, that could trigger an uncontrolled expansion. We'd be risking—" "I know the risks," Briggs cut her off. "Do it now." As Voss rushed to implement the desperate plan, Briggs turned his attention back to the alien controls. His fingers danced across the panels, inputting complex equations faster than any human mind could process. The ship groaned and buckled as conflicting energies tore at its superstructure. Warning klaxons blared throughout the vessel, but Briggs tuned them out, focused entirely on his audacious attempt. "Sir," the sensor officer called out, "I'm detecting a massive build-up of quantum potential. If this keeps up, we're going to—" His words were cut off as a blinding flash of light engulfed the bridge. Briggs felt himself stretched and compressed, his very atoms seeming to unravel and reconstitute in the span of a heartbeat. When his vision cleared, he found himself floating in an endless sea of swirling, multicolored energy. The derelict ship was gone, along with his crew and the encroaching void. As Briggs struggled to comprehend what had happened, he realized that he was witnessing the birth of a new universe. The carefully focused Big Bang implosion he had hoped to trigger had occurred, fueled by the unimaginable energies of the buffer continuum. All around him, stars and galaxies coalesced from the primordial soup of creation. Briggs watched in awe as entire cosmic structures formed and evolved in the blink of an eye. But even as he marveled at the spectacle, a chill ran down his spine. Had they truly escaped the void? Or had they merely postponed the inevitable? As if in answer to his unspoken question, Briggs detected a faint disturbance in the cosmic background radiation. Something was moving through the newborn universe, leaving a trail of darkness in its wake. Briggs' eyes darted across the holographic displays, his fingers flying over the alien controls. "Divert all power to the Asridian manifold," he shouted. "We need that cryon harmonic barrier up now." The derelict's ancient systems groaned in protest as energy surged through long-dormant conduits. Outside the viewport, tendrils of absolute nothingness writhed and pulsed, threatening to consume the newborn universe. "Cryon field forming," reported Lieutenant Kira, her Bajoran features taut with concentration, subspace frequencies modulating. The deck plates shuddered violently beneath their feet. Briggs grabbed a nearby console to steady himself. "Increase harmonic frequency," he ordered. "We need to disrupt that disintegration wave." Through the viewport, he watched as lances of oblivion slammed into the flickering barrier. Waves of exotic particles crashed against the cryon field in a furious cosmic storm. "Hull integrity dropping," shouted Chief Engineer Voss. "The stresses are tearing us apart." Briggs gritted his teeth. "Reroute plasma from the primary reactor. Feed it directly into the barrier emitters." Voss's eyes widened. "Sir, that could—" The lights flickered and dimmed as precious power was diverted. For a moment the cryon barrier flared brilliantly, pushing back the encroaching void. Their victory was short-lived. Dark energy beams lanced out from the singularity, slicing through the derelict's hull like paper. Klaxons blared as atmosphere vented into space. "Seal those breaches!" Briggs shouted. "We can't—" His words were cut short as a crystalline tendril punched through the oscillating barrier, its entropic energies converting nearby matter into a swarm of exotic anti-particles. "It's adapting," Briggs realized, horror dawning on his face. "We're losing ground." That's when Zartok spoke up, his cybernetic eye gleaming. "The Bajoran orbs," he said. "We can use them to reinforce the barrier." Briggs turned to the mercenary. "What?" "Psychoreactive weapons in the armory," Zartok explained rapidly. "They'll create psionic harmonies the void cancer can't match." "It could vaporize us all," Kira warned. Briggs looked from the viewport to his crew, weighing their dwindling options. "Do it," he finally said. As entropy beams tore through the ship, Zartok sprinted to the armory. Moments later, the ship's systems registered a massive spike in subspace energy. Waves of eldritch power radiated outward, twisting the cryon barrier into an interference matrix of fluctuating realities. For a few precious minutes, it seemed to work. Then alarms shrieked as reactor containment fields began to rupture. The orbs were overloading, threatening an antimatter explosion that would obliterate them all. "Evacuate," Briggs bellowed. "Everyone to the shuttles now." Chaos erupted as the crew scrambled to escape. Briggs herded the last stragglers into a waiting shuttle, glancing back at the derelict one final time. The engines roared to life, but they were too slow. A final energetic wavefront slammed into them, propelling the shuttle directly into the roiling mass of the singularity. Time seemed to slow as Briggs watched exotic particles begin to dissolve the shuttle's hull. He closed his eyes, clinging to the desperate hope that his mad plan might yet save the universe, even as oblivion engulfed them. Briggs's fingers dug into the shuttle's control panel as exotic particles ripped through the hull. Alarms blared, warning of imminent structural collapse. He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the end. A blinding flash engulfed them. The shuttle lurched violently, spinning end over end. Through the viewport, Briggs glimpsed reality itself tearing apart as the derelict's reactor shockwave collided with the void cancer singularity. Cosmic energies erupted in a cataclysmic explosion. The shuttle tumbled through the maelstrom, buffeted by waves of raw creation. Briggs fought to maintain consciousness as G-forces threatened to tear him apart. With a bone-jarring impact, the shuttle slammed into a sea of molten rock. Metal groaned and buckled. Emergency systems sputtered to life, struggling to maintain a breathable atmosphere. Briggs dragged himself from the wreckage, stumbling onto the cooling surface of a newborn world. He gasped, not from the acrid air, but from the sight that greeted him. The sky boiled with infrared fire. Plasma arced between newborn stars, their light filtered through swirling nebulae. It was beautiful and terrifying, the raw stuff of universe creation unfolding before his eyes. My God, Zartok rasped, emerging from the shuttle. We made it. Briggs nodded, still stunned. We're the first life in this new cosmos. Over the next weeks, they worked tirelessly. Briggs coordinated the survivors, establishing a fortified camp as the planet cooled and solidified beneath them. They salvaged what they could from the shuttle, including the precious cryon reactor. Zartok's engineering skills proved invaluable as they jury-rigged protective fields. Without them, they'd have been obliterated by the cosmic debris raining down as their solar system took shape. A year passed. Their world, which Briggs dubbed Nova Terra, settled into a stable orbit around a yellow sun. We need to expand, Briggs said, studying star charts they'd painstakingly compiled. There could be other survivors out there. Their first deep space probes brought astonishing news, the detected wreckage of other ships that had made the transition. Among them, a Bajoran cruiser. Briggs led the expedition himself. They found a handful of survivors in stasis, including Vran, son of Chancellor Thrin. As Vran recovered, he shared vital data on the Omega Protocol. It worked, he said, his voice hoarse. We created a pocket universe, safe from the void cancer. A new beginning. With this knowledge, Briggs and Vran forged an alliance. They located more survivors, built extraction arcs, and slowly but surely established a fledgling civilization. Decades passed. Under Briggs' leadership as Primum, their commonwealth flourished. Yet he never forgot the horrors they'd fled. In orbit above Nova Terra, massive solar forges took shape, churning out warships and weapons on an unprecedented scale. Briggs stood on the bridge of humanity's first new dreadnought, staring out at the stars. They'd survived extinction once. He'd make damn sure they were ready if that threat ever rose again. Primum Briggs stood before the expansive viewport of Nova Terra's orbital command station, his eyes fixed on the gleaming shipyards below. Massive construction arms swung in a synchronized dance, affixing hull plating and weapons systems to the skeletal frames of new warships. Production numbers are up 15% this quarter, sir, reported Admiral Voss, her voice tinged with pride. The new singularity projector arrays are being installed on all capital ships as we speak. Briggs nodded, his gaze unwavering. Good. We'll need every ship we can muster. A priority alert flashed across his neural implant. Briggs's eyes narrowed as he processed the incoming data stream. We have a situation. Multiple spatial ruptures detected in the Hydra's Maw system. Sir, Voss said, leaning in to study the readouts. Those energy signatures, they're unlike anything we've encountered before. Briggs's eyebrows furrowed as he watched the alien vessels materialize near the system's primary mining outpost. Alert, General Dresch. I want the Hephaestus battle group deployed immediately. As Voss relayed the orders, a frantic distress call cut through the command center's speakers. The panicked voice of a mining platform supervisor filled the air. This is Hydra's Maw Outpost 7. We're under attack by unknown hostiles. Oh God, they're everywhere. Some kind of insectoids. The transmission devolved into static, punctuated by inhuman screeching. Briggs's fingers flew across the holographic interface, bringing up live feeds from the besieged outpost. The images that flickered to life chilled him to the core. Swarms of chitinous, multi-limbed creatures poured through breach points in the station's hull. Their mandibles clicked and snapped as they tore through bulkheads and eviscerated fleeing crew members. But it was the weaponry that truly horrified him. Beams of sickly green energy lanced out from the alien vessels, striking human targets with terrifying precision. Where they hit, flesh and bone simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only dissipating clouds of subatomic particles. Molecular destabilizers, Voss breathed, her face pale. They're not just killing our people, they're erasing them from existence. Briggs watched as a handful of escape pods jettisoned from the dying outpost, broadcasting desperate pleas for aid. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. Patch me through to Dresch, he growled. General Kalen Dresch's face appeared on the main view screen, his expression grim. Primum, we're en route to Hydra's Maw. ETA 30 minutes. Make it 20, Briggs ordered. You have full authority to engage and neutralize the hostile force, but Kalen, he paused, locking eyes with his protege. I want prisoners. We need to know what we're dealing with. Dresh nodded sharply. Understood, sir. We won't let you down. As the transmission cut out, Briggs turned back to the tactical display. He watched the pulsing signatures of Dresh's task force as they hurtled towards the embattled system, praying they would arrive in time. Hours later, Briggs stood rigidly before the same viewport, his face illuminated by the flashes of distant antimatter detonations. The battle for Hydra's maw raged across the system, a furious exchange of destructive energies that lit up the void. He observed the Hephaestus lead the charge, its massive form cleaving through the insectoid swarm. Dresh's tactical prowess was evident in every maneuver, every precisely timed barrage. When the general's boarding operation commenced, Briggs held his breath. He tracked the progress of the marine squads as they fought their way through the alien hive ship, wincing at each casualty report. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dresh's voice crackled over the comms. Primum target neutralized, returning to base with salvaged alien tech and specimens. Briggs exhaled slowly, allowing himself a moment of relief. But as he studied the after-action reports and preliminary analyses of the alien threat, a cold dread settled in the pit of his stomach. This was only the beginning. He could feel it in his bones. Whatever force had torn its way into their fledgling universe, it was hungry, and humanity would need to be ready for the storm to come. Primum Briggs stood before the holographic display in the Strategic Command Center, his piercing gaze fixed on the swirling vortex of data streaming across the screen. The room hummed with nervous energy as his advisors and military chiefs filed in, their faces etched with concern. Let's begin, Briggs said, his voice cutting through the murmur of hushed conversations. General Dresh stepped forward, activating a series of data nodes with a flick of his wrist. Three-dimensional images of twisted, chitinous forms materialized in the air. Sir, our analysis of the Hydra's maw wreckage is complete, Dresh reported, his cybernetic eye whirring as it focused on the alien anatomy. These creatures, which we've dubbed xenomorphs, are unlike anything we've encountered. Briggs leaned in, studying the intricate biological structures. Explain. They're a eusocial species with hive-mind characteristics, Dresh continued, but it's their mastery of biotechnology that's truly staggering. Their ships aren't just vessels, they're living organisms, capable of adapting and evolving mid-battle. The holographic display shifted, showing time-lapse footage of a barren world transforming into a nightmarish landscape of organic structures and pulsating growths. A collective shudder ran through the room, Briggs' fists tight as he processed the implications. There's more, interjected Dr. Ilara Vex, head of xenobiology. She tapped her datapad, bringing up streams of alien code. We've partially decrypted their data codices. The xenomorph's sole purpose appears to be the assimilation of other species' biological and technological advancements. Precisely, Vex confirmed. They spread across space like a virus, leaving nothing but stripped, lifeless husks in their wake. What about their numbers? He asked. Briggs studied the projected fleet movements, his mind racing. How do we stack up? Badly, Koros admitted. Even with our combined naval strength, we're outnumbered at least 100 to 1. The tension in the room was palpable. Whispers of defeat and hopelessness began to circulate. Briggs thumped his hand on the console, silencing the murmurs. We didn't survive the void cancer just to roll over now, he growled. If we can't match their numbers, we'll outsmart them. He manipulated the holographic display, zooming in on a particular system. Antillion, our most valuable forge world. If the xenomorphs are after resources, that's where they'll strike first. A plan began to form in Briggs's mind, bold and desperate in equal measure. We'll make it look vulnerable. Evacuate the critical infrastructure, leave only a skeleton crew. Meanwhile, we'll seed the system with stealth mines and singularity projectors. Understanding dawned on General Dresh's face. A trap. Briggs nodded, a fierce glint in his eye. When they commit to the assault, we'll spring it. Hit them with everything we've got. He turned to face his advisors, his voice resolute. I won't lie to you, this plan is risky and the cost will be high. But it's our best shot at stopping this invasion before it begins. As the meeting adjourned and his staff filed out to begin preparations, Briggs remained, staring at the holographic representation of the approaching xenomorph armada. Come on, you bastards, he muttered under his breath. Let's see what you're really made of. The acrid stench of ozone and burning circuits filled Briggs's nostrils as he regained consciousness in the cramped escape pod. His skin seared with radiation burns, every movement sending jolts of agony through his body. Through the viewport, the vastness of space was alight with the dying throes of massive ships. Briggs activated the pod's emergency beacon, his fingers leaving smears of blood on the controls. Within minutes, a Primum rescue shuttle latched onto the pod, bringing him aboard. Primum, thank the stars you're alive, the medic said, rushing to stabilize him. As the shuttle sped towards the nearest medical frigate, Briggs's mind raced. The destruction of the Alpha Prime had been a crucial blow, but he knew the fight was not nearly finished. Aboard the medical frigate, Briggs endured agonizing treatments to counteract the radiation poisoning. Between bouts of nausea and fever, he pored over tactical readouts on a datapad, watching as the scattered xenomorph forces regrouped. Chancellor Vran's face appeared on the comm screen, his expression grim but determined. Primum, the Basilisk Corps has disabled 3 more Prime Dreadnoughts, but our losses are severe. Briggs nodded, wincing at the movement. We've bought ourselves time, Chancellor, but we need to reinforce those singularity partitions before they can mount another assault. The next days blurred together as Briggs coordinated with his commanders from his medical bay. Reports flooded in from across Primum space, worlds ravaged, fleets decimated, but the line holding. For now. In a secure briefing room aboard the medical frigate, Briggs met with his inner circle. General Dresch's face was haggard, the cybernetic implant around his eye pulsing with data. The Hades Gambit worked better than we could have hoped, Dresch reported, but the dimensional instabilities are spreading faster than predicted. We're detecting gravitational anomalies in multiple systems. Admiral Koros, her uniform still bearing scorch marks from recent battles, pulled up a holographic star chart. Our long-range sensors are picking up disturbing energy signatures beyond the fractured zones. It's possible we've drawn the attention of something else. Briggs studied the readouts, his stomach knotting. We knew the risks when we approved this plan. Now we deal with the consequences. He turned to face his advisors, his voice steady despite the pain racking his body. We've survived extinction twice now. We'll do it again if we have to, but first, we shore up our defenses and prepare for whatever comes next. As the meeting adjourned, Briggs remained, staring at the holographic representations of the dimensional fractures that now scarred their space. In buying their survival, they may have opened the door to threats beyond imagining, but they would face them together, as they always had. The Goliath's command deck buzzed with frantic activity as Admiral Briggs limped to the central holotable. His uniform hung in tatters, skin raw from radiation burns. Chancellor Vran and General Dresch flanked him, their faces etched with exhaustion and grief. Vran's fingers danced across the controls, bringing up a 3-dimensional star map. Red markers pulsed across dozens of systems, each representing a xenomorph incursion point. It's worse than we feared, Vran said, his voice hoarse. The Bajoran Armada at Atropos, there's nothing left. We lost contact with the Republic Quad fleet 6 hours ago. Briggs' eyes sharp. He turned to Dresch, who was studying readouts from their remaining warships. What about our forces, General? Dresch shook his head, his cybernetic eye whirring as it processed the data. We're running on fumes, sir. Munitions critically low, antimatter reserves depleted. At our current burn rate, we've got 6 standard cycles before we're dead in the water. The command deck fell silent, the weight of their situation crushing down on every soul present. Briggs studied the holographic display, his mind racing through scenarios, each more desperate than the last. We have one option left, he said finally, his voice cutting through the tension. Operation Tartarus. Fran's eyes widened. You can't be serious, that's suicide. It's our only chance, Briggs countered. We hit them hard, we hit them fast, and we seal those dimensional breaches before they can pour more forces through. He manipulated the holomap, zooming in on key strategic points. I'll lead a strike team to hit their primary beachheads. Thanatos Forge, New Hyperion, Archimedes Hive. We'll need our best commandos, both Primum and Bajoran. Dresh nodded grimly. I'll begin massing our remaining capital ships for the starburst assaults. We'll punch right into the heart of their infestations. As the command staff dispersed to prepare for the operation, Briggs made his way to the Goliath's armory. Row upon row of heavily armored dropships stood ready, their hulls scarred from countless battles. Elite commandos filed in, their faces a mix of tenacity and resignation. Briggs addressed them, his voice steady despite the pain racking his body. He donned his own set of unstable anti-cryon armor, the energy field crackling around him. Let's remind these xenomorph bastards why humanity has survived extinction twice already. The dropship screamed through the atmosphere of Thanatos Forge, plasma bolts from alien biocannons streaking past. Briggs and his Bajoran shock troops hit the ground running, immediately engulfed in a maelstrom of chitinous limbs and gnashing teeth. Acrid smoke filled the air as they fought their way through the alien horde. The unstable anti-cryon armor sizzled and popped, barely holding together under the onslaught. Briggs watched in horror as one of his soldiers was impaled by a massive pincer, the xenomorph's acidic blood eating through the armor in seconds. They battled street by street, building by building, leaving a trail of alien corpses in their wake. Finally, they breached the massive organic structure at the heart of the infestation. As Briggs planted the antimatter dispersal bomb, a barrage from flesh-borer cannons tore through their ranks. He felt his own armor begin to fail, the anti-cryon field flickering dangerously. "Detonation in 10 seconds!" he shouted, diving for cover, as the Hive Nexus erupted in a blinding flash of energy. Across the sector, similar scenes of desperate heroism and sacrifice played out. General Dresh, aboard his flagship, watched the feeds from a dozen battles with grim satisfaction. The dreadnought's quantum shear drives ignited, catapulting the massive vessel directly into the heart of the xenomorph armada. As space-time itself began to warp and tear, Dresh closed his eyes, a small smile playing across his lips. In the skies above Archimedes Hive, Chancellor Vran's voice crackled over the comms. "This is it, my friends, one last push to save everything we hold dear." His flagship unleashed a devastating antimatter salvo, crippling the alien command center. But even as victory seemed within reach, virulent tendrils lashed out, impaling the escort carriers. Vran watched in horror as the xenomorph biomatter began to spread, converting his ships into nightmarish spawn matrices. With a heavy heart, he input the codes to unleash their final weapon. In the span of 72 hours, over 30 colony systems were purged from existence. The cost was beyond measure, but the xenomorph advance had been halted, for now. On the bridge of the last surviving capital ship, Briggs surveyed the ravaged star systems. His body ached, his soul weary beyond words. But there was no time for rest. "Set course for New Carthage," he ordered. "We have 6 months to prepare for round 2. As the battered vessel limped towards their final bastion, Briggs allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. They had survived, yes, but at what cost, and what fresh horrors awaited them beyond the fractured walls of reality? He pushed the thoughts aside. There would be time for existential dread later. For now they had a war to win, and Briggs would be damned if he let humanity go quietly into the night. The cavernous shipyards of New Carthage hummed with frantic activity. Admiral Briggs stood on a gantry overlooking the main assembly floor, his eyes scanning the endless rows of half-finished warships stretching into the distance. The clanging of metal on metal and the hiss of plasma welders filled the air as thousands of workers toiled around the clock. Briggs turned to the holographic display floating beside him, studying the production metrics scrolling past. "We're pushing the limits of what's possible," he muttered to himself, rubbing his chin. A young officer approached, snapping to attention. "Sir, General Dresch requests your presence in Dock 17. Briggs nodded, following the officer through a maze of catwalks and lifts. They emerged into a vast chamber where a behemoth of a ship took shape. Its hull dwarfed even the largest xenomorph dreadnoughts Briggs had encountered. General Dresch stood at the base of the Titanic vessel, conferring with a group of Bajoran engineers. He looked up as Briggs approached, a rare smile creasing his weathered face. "Admiral, come see what we've accomplished," Dresch said, gesturing to the ship. "The Dominion class, our answer to the xenomorph threat." Briggs ran his hand along the smooth hull plating, feeling the thrum of power beneath. "Impressive. What about the singularity reactors?" One of the Bajoran engineers stepped forward, activating a holographic schematic. "We've successfully integrated them into the primary weapon systems, sir. The gravitational lances they produce should cut through the aliens' biomass like nothing we've seen before." As they discussed the finer points of the new dreadnoughts, alarms blared throughout the facility. Briggs's comlink crackled to life. "Admiral, we're detecting a massive energy signature emerging from the deep forge cavern," a panicked voice reported. Briggs and Dresch exchanged glances before racing to the nearest transport pod. They shot through a network of tunnels, emerging into a cavern of staggering proportions. Before them loomed a structure that defied comprehension, Bastion Prime. The planet-sized war platform pulsed with barely contained energy, its honeycomb surface dripping with weapons. Briggs watched in awe as entire sections of the neutron star were siphoned into the massive construct. "By the gods," Dresch whispered, his cybernetic eye whirring as it attempted to process the scale of what they were witnessing. Briggs strode purposefully towards the main control hub, barking orders into his comlink. "Begin final systems check. I want Bastion Prime ready for deployment within the hour." As the gargantuan war machine stirred to life, Briggs felt a presence at his side. Chancellor Vran had arrived with his cadre of battle savants, their eyes glowing with eldritch energy. "We stand ready to fulfill our part, Admiral," Vran intoned, his voice resonating with otherworldly power. Hours later, Briggs stood on Bastion Prime's command deck, watching as the Titanic vessel cleared New Carthage's orbit. The viewscreens showed a sea of Allied ships falling into formation around them, humanity's last best hope against the xenomorph menace. "All ships, prepare for translation to the outer colonies," Briggs ordered, his voice carrying across the vast fleet. "Today we take the fight to the enemy." As one, the Armada surged forward, disappearing into the void of space. The battle for New Hyperion loomed on the horizon, and with it, the fate of all humanity. The acrid stench of ozone and burnt circuitry filled the air as Admiral Briggs strode through Bastion Prime's damaged corridors. Emergency lighting cast an eerie red glow, illuminating the frantic efforts of repair crews as they welded breaches and rerouted power conduits. Briggs stepped onto the command deck, his boots crunching on shattered display screens. Fleet Marshal Dresch and Chancellor Vran stood hunched over a flickering holotable, their faces etched with exhaustion. "Status report," Briggs barked, his voice hoarse from shouting orders during the battle. Dresch looked up, his cybernetic eye whirring as it focused. "We've sealed the major hull breaches, sir. Life support is stable, but our antimatter reserves are down to 37%. Vran's fingers danced across the holotable's controls, bringing up a tactical overlay of the surrounding space. Long-range scans are picking up multiple xenomorph splinter fleets converging on our position. They're stripping resources from infested colonies to replenish their numbers." Briggs leaned in, studying the holographic display. Red markers swarmed across dozens of systems, each representing a potential staging area for the alien counterattack. He felt the weight of command pressing down on him, knowing that every second of indecision could cost countless lives. "We can't let them regroup," Briggs said, his voice low but firm. "We need to hit them hard and fast before they can concentrate their forces." He manipulated the hologram, zooming in on a pitch-black region of space. The Orpheus Void. Our recon data shows they've turned it into a massive spawning ground. That's where we strike. Dresh's human eye widened. Sir, with all due respect, that's suicide. We barely survived the last engagement. Briggs met his gaze unflinchingly. It's our only shot. We use Bastion Prime's firepower to punch through their defenses and take out their primary berthing chambers. He turned to Vran. Assemble our most elite shock troops. I want insertion teams ready for deployment within the hour. As Vran hurried to comply, Briggs activated the ship-wide comm system. All hands, this is Admiral Briggs. Prepare for immediate jump to the Orpheus Void. Today we take the fight to the enemy's doorstep. The massive dreadnought shuddered as its engines powered up, repair crews working frantically to keep systems online. Briggs watched from the command deck as the stars blurred into streaks of light, carrying them towards their most daring plan yet. Hours later, cloaked stealth frigates slipped silently through the inky blackness of the Orpheus Void. On board, Primum Marine Vanquishers and Bajoran Nightblade operatives checked their gear one final time. Captain Thrace, leader of the Vanquishers, addressed his team in hushed tones. Remember, we're here to plant the cyclonic implosion nodes and get out. No heroics. The frigates ghosted past massive xenomorph patrols, their cloaking fields barely masking their energy signatures. As they approached the first of the gargantuan spawning complexes, Thrace felt his throat tighten. The sheer scale of the alien structures defied comprehension. Initiating deployment, the pilot's voice crackled over the comm. May whatever gods are left watch over you. Thrace and his team launched from the frigate's airlock, their armor's thrusters carrying them silently towards the pulsating organic surface of the nearest berthing chamber. As they landed, the spongy alien material seemed to recoil from their touch. Fan out, Thrace ordered. Plant those nodes and rendezvous at the extraction point in 15 minutes. The strike teams worked with practiced efficiency, setting charges and disabling drone hubs as they moved deeper into the nightmarish complex. Thrace's heart pounded as he planted the final implosion node at the very heart of the structure. All teams fall back, he hissed into his comm. We're out of time. As the insertion squads raced back to their extraction points, alarms began to blare throughout the spawning complex. Xenomorph drones swarmed from every crevice, their chitinous limbs scrabbling against the walls. Thrace fired his pulse rifle in controlled bursts, covering his team's retreat. Move, move, move! They barely made it back to the stealth frigates, the hatch sealing shut behind them as xenomorph claws scraped against the hull. As they pulled away from the doomed berthing chamber, Thrace allowed himself a grim smile. The real fireworks were about to begin. On Bastion Prime's bridge, Admiral Briggs watched as the last of the raider teams reported in. All implosion nodes are in place, sir, the Comems officer announced. Briggs nodded, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. Signal the fleet, we're going in. The human Bajoran armada surged forward, Bastion Prime at its head. As they plunged into the heart of the Orpheus Void, xenomorph bioships rose to meet them in a furious tide of chitin and weaponized flesh. All ships open fire, Briggs roared. The void lit up with antimatter barrages and plasma lances as the two fleets clashed. Bastion Prime shuddered under the onslaught, but its massive guns never stopped firing. As they pushed deeper into the nebula, the true horror of the xenomorph spawning grounds revealed itself. Entire planetoids had been transformed into pulsating, organic monstrosities. Rivers of half-formed alien ships flowed from their gaping maws, joining the frenzied battle. Briggs felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. We're in range. Detonate the implosion nodes now. A series of blinding flashes erupted across the spawning complexes. The fabric of space itself seemed to twist and buckle as the cyclonic charges ignited. Massive fissures spread outward from the detonation points, consuming everything in their path. Bastion Prime, target those ruptures, Briggs ordered. Full power to the spinal plasma cannons. The dreadnought's main guns opened up, pouring devastating energy into the collapsing spawning chambers. Briggs watched in awe as entire sections of the xenomorph production line were vaporized, reduced to swirling clouds of superheated debris. But the aliens weren't finished yet. A swarm of bioships broke through the defensive line, pummeling Bastion Prime with a relentless barrage of organic missiles and plasma bolts. "Hull breaches on decks 17 through 22, an officer shouted over the din of battle. Briggs steadied himself against the holotable as the ship rocked under the impacts. "Rotate shield harmonics, keep those plasma cannons firing." The melee raged on, neither side willing to yield. Briggs lost track of time, his world narrowing to the ebb and flow of the tactical displays. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last xenomorph capital ship fractured apart against the twisted wreckage of its own spawning grounds. As the dust settled, Briggs surveyed the carnage. The Orpheus Void was now a graveyard of shattered alien hulks and irradiated debris fields. He allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction before turning to his command staff. "Signal the fleet," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. "We regroup and push on. This was just one nexus. We've got a long way to go before this war is over." As Bastion Prime limped away from the ruined spawning grounds, repair crews already swarming over its battered hull, Briggs knew the hardest battles still lay ahead. The xenomorphs would not rest until every human world burned, and he would not rest until every last spawning pit was reduced to ashes. The acrid stench of ozone and charred circuitry filled Admiral Briggs' nostrils as he surveyed the battered remnants of his once mighty armada. Bastion Prime's command deck, once a bustling hub of activity, now stood eerily silent, save for the occasional spark of malfunctioning equipment. Briggs' boots crunched over shattered display screens as he made his way to the main tactical holotable. His fingers danced across the controls, bringing up a flickering map of the surrounding systems. Red markers swarmed across dozens of sectors, each representing a potential xenomorph hive cluster. "We can't let them regroup," Briggs muttered, his voice hoarse from hours of shouting orders. He tapped his comlink, summoning his remaining command staff. Minutes later, Fleet Marshal Dresch and Chancellor Vran stood beside him, their faces etched with exhaustion and grim purpose. Dresch's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on the tactical display. "Sir, with all due respect, our fleet is in tatters. We barely survived Orpheus." Briggs met his gaze unflinchingly. "Which is why we're switching tactics. Hit-and-run operations, surgical strikes on their breeding grounds." He manipulated the hologram, zooming in on a hellish-looking world. "Tartarus Hive, that's our first target." Fran nodded, his eyes glowing with eldritch energy. "My Nightblades stand ready, Admiral." "Good," Briggs said. "We go in small teams, plant cyclonic charges in their neural cortices and get out. No extended engagements." Days later, Briggs found himself leading a strike force through the nightmarish landscape of Tartarus Hive. Hurricane-force winds filled with viric spores battered against his armor as he and his elite squad fought their way deeper into the alien stronghold. Acidic ichor sprayed across Briggs's visor as he emptied his pulse rifle into an onrushing xenomorph drone. Beside him, a Bajoran Nightblade effortlessly decapitated another with a monomolecular blade. "Push forward," Briggs shouted over the din of battle. "We're almost at the central chamber." They battled through twisting corridors of pulsating organic matter, every surface writhing with alien life. Finally, they reached the hive's neural core, a massive, throbbing mass of synaptic tissue. "Plant those charges," Briggs ordered, providing covering fire as his team worked. As the last explosive was set, a deafening screech echoed through the chamber. Briggs spun to see a monstrous xenomorph queen emerging from a hidden recess. "Fall back," he roared, emptying his weapon into the beast's armored hide. They barely made it clear of the hive before the cyclonic charges detonated. The entire structure imploded, collapsing in on itself as the virae tore through its neural network. Briggs watched from the extraction shuttle as Tartarus Hive crumbled into dust. One threat eliminated, but many more remained. He knew the grueling campaign ahead would test the limits of his forces and his own persistence. For months, this pattern repeated across dozens of embattled systems. Briggs coordinated with Vran and Dresh, striking at xenomorph strongholds with precision and overwhelming force. On Hellforge, Vran's Republiquard legions unleashed searing waves of plasma, incinerating swarms of drones as they pushed towards the planet's core. Briggs watched from orbit as entire continents were scorched clean of the alien infestation. Bellerophon proved to be their costliest engagement yet. Dresh executed a daring pincer movement, sacrificing waves of fighters to draw out the xenomorph defenders. As the aliens swarmed to meet the threat, Bastion Prime unleashed its full arsenal. The Singularity projectors carved vast furrows through the planet's crust, annihilating huge swathes of biomass. Briggs gripped the command rail as the dreadnought shuddered under the strain of its own weapons. "Hold steady," he shouted as alarms blared across the bridge. "We've almost got them." A final barrage from Bastion Prime's main guns reduced Bellerophon's primary hive cluster to a sea of molten slag. As the firing cycle ended, Briggs sagged against the tactical display, utterly spent. "Deploy the Scorch Seed drones," he ordered wearily. "I want every inch of that rock sterilized." With each hard-won victory, Briggs felt the weight of command pressing down on him. The losses were staggering, entire fleets reduced to drifting debris fields, countless soldiers sacrificed to hold the line against the xenomorph onslaught. Yet they pressed on system by system, driving the aliens back. Until finally, after months of relentless combat, they reached New Avalon, the last major xenomorph stronghold in the sector. Bastion Prime hung in high orbit, its once pristine hull now a patchwork of hastily applied armor plating and field repairs. Briggs stood on the command deck, surveying the scarred world below. "All ships prepare for final assault," he ordered, his voice carrying across the assembled fleet. "Today we take back our home." As one, the Armada surged forward, Bastion Prime leading the charge. The battle for New Avalon had begun, and with it, the fate of humanity hung in the balance. If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.